Millionaire CEO never fell in love until he met the most unlikely intern. Before the story begins, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The first day of an internship was supposed to be exciting, a nerve-wracking but filled with endless possibilities. Natalie Carter, however, was experiencing a different kind of excitement, pure, unfiltered disaster. It started with her bus breaking down 2 blocks from the Drennan Industries headquarters, leaving her to scramble for a taxi. The driver, either completely new to the city or just out to test her patience, took a detour in the wrong direction, making her even later. By the time she reached the building, the morning rush had begun, a sea of sharply dressed professionals flowing in and out of the glass doors, moving with the efficiency of people who knew exactly where they were going. Unlike her, Natalie barely had time to process the overwhelming sight of the massive skyscraper before fate decided to throw in one more obstacle. As she stepped toward the entrance, the heel of her shoe caught in a metal grate embedded in the sidewalk. For a horrifying second, she was yanked backward, nearly toppling over as her hair whipped into her face from the sudden motion. "No, no, no, come on," she hissed, trying to free herself without looking too much like an escaped circus act. She bent slightly, wiggling her foot, but the shoe wouldn't budge. She was about to yank it harder when, snap, the heel broke clean off. Natalie let out a silent scream, gripping the now uneven shoe as she stared in horror at her reflection in the towering glass windows. One side of her body was now lopsided, and to top it off, her once neatly styled hair was a windswept disaster, sticking up in ways that no amount of smoothing could fix. She looked like she had lost a fight with a tornado. "Perfect," she muttered under her breath, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Just perfect." With no time to mourn her shoe, Natalie ripped off the other heel and sprinted barefoot across the lobby, desperately trying to reach the elevator before it closed. "Hold it! Please, wait!" she called out, practically flying toward the stainless steel doors. A hand moved to press the button just in time, and as she leaped through the narrowing gap, she realized she had too much momentum. Her body collided hard into a tall, dark-suited figure standing near the control panel. Oof! The impact was solid enough that the man actually stumbled slightly. Natalie barely had time to react before she stepped down, directly onto his foot. The man let out a sharp breath, his jaw tightening as if physically restraining a reaction. "Oh my God!" Natalie jumped back, gripping the elevator wall for balance. "I am so sorry. Are you okay?" The man exhaled slowly, straightening. He had broad shoulders, perfectly combed dark hair, and an expression that radiated authority and exasperation in equal measure. His crisp navy suit screamed importance, and the glare he sent her nearly set her soul on fire. "You—" He barely had time to speak before his phone, which had flown out of his hand from the impact, hit the elevator floor with a thud. Natalie winced. "Oh no." She scrambled to grab it, her heart hammering as she held it out to him with both hands. "Please don't be broken. Please don't be broken." The man snatched it back, pressing a side button. The screen flickered. A long diagonal crack stretched across it. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if mentally counting to 10. "Fantastic," he said, voice flat. "Now my phone has also taken a solo flight." Natalie let out a nervous, almost hysterical laugh. "At least it survived, right? Modern phones are pretty tough." She stopped when he turned to face her fully, his piercing blue-gray eyes locked onto hers with quiet disbelief. She swallowed hard. Or not. Before either of them could say another word, the elevator shuddered and jolted to a stop. The lights flickered. Silence. Natalie's stomach plummeted. She began, gripping the railing. "Is this normal?" The man sighed, rubbing his temple before pressing the emergency button. The elevator stopped. Natalie blinked. "Yeah, I noticed." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to ignore the fact that she was now trapped in a metal box with the very man she had just physically assaulted. "Great, amazing. This is divine punishment, isn't it?" The man, clearly not in the mood for small talk, checked his watch. He looked completely composed, as if this was just another inconvenience in his otherwise perfectly structured day. "So," Natalie attempted, forcing a weak smile, "any bright ideas? Should we start shouting for help? Send smoke signals?" "We wait," he answered dryly. She exhaled dramatically, leaning against the wall. Well, that's boring. He barely reacted. We're in an elevator, not a comedy club. Her lips twitched. Speaking of which, do you like stand-up comedy? His expression barely shifted. No, man. Natalie placed a hand over her chest, feigning deep offense. That's a shame. I love it. There's this comedian who says bosses always tell employees, let's handle this over email, but then they never actually reply. Have you ever ignored an email? You talk a lot, he observed. She grinned sheepishly. I talk when I'm nervous. My brain switches to AM radio mode and starts broadcasting every thought I have. That's a problem. I'd say it's an unrecognized talent. The intercom crackled, and a voice finally came through. Folks, we've had a small malfunction. The elevator should be back up and running in about 5 minutes. The man leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply. Natalie, on the other hand, clapped her hands together. 5 minutes is enough time to reflect on life. Tell me, have you ever done anything super embarrassing? He narrowed his eyes. Why would I tell you that? Because we're stuck together. And according to the unofficial elevator code, you have to share an embarrassing secret when trapped with a stranger. He stared at her like she had just spoken in an alien language. I've never heard of that code. Of course not, I just made it up. But the rule still stands. He sighed. Fine. A beat of silence. When I was a kid, I fell into a hotel pool because I wanted to see if it was possible to walk on water. Natalie broke into a full-blown grin. Wait, did you think you were Jesus? I thought I read something about water surface tension and wanted to test it. Incredible. Wrong, but incredible. Before she could say more, the elevator jolted and resumed moving. Her relief was short-lived when the doors opened on the top floor, and she finally saw the company nameplate on the glass office ahead. A receptionist greeted her with a bright smile. You must be the new intern. Mr. Drennan wants to see you before you start. Natalie froze. She slowly turned her head toward the man she had just tripped over, stepped on, and insulted. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, you again. Natalie wanted to sink into the floor. She had just physically assaulted the CEO. Fantastic. Natalie Carter had experienced her fair share of awkward encounters, but nothing could top the absolute catastrophe of meeting Adrian Drennan, stepping on his foot, smashing his phone, trapping him in an elevator. If someone had given her a checklist of how to ensure your boss hates you on the first day, she would have checked every single box. And yet, despite every bone in her body urging her to disappear, she was still standing in front of his office, facing him again. Adrian Drennan, CEO of Drennan Industries, the very man she had physically assaulted with her entire existence. He was seated behind an immaculately polished mahogany desk, flipping through a folder as if this was just another routine meeting. His expression was cold, unreadable, a stark contrast to the exasperation he had shown in the elevator. Natalie, on the other hand, felt like a sheep that had wandered into a lion's den. Sit. The word was spoken so smoothly, so evenly, that it didn't even feel like an order, more like a verdict. Natalie sat. Adrian finally looked up at her, his sharp blue-gray eyes scanning her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. So, he said, lacing his fingers together, you're the intern that HR described as exceptionally proactive. Natalie blinked. They said that? Apparently. His voice was flat. Though after the last 15 minutes, I have some concerns about their definition of proactive. She swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh. Well, I was proactive in getting here, even if it involved a few obstacles. His brow twitched as if fighting the urge to sigh. Obstacles? Yes, she smiled too brightly. Unfortunate accidents, really. Completely unintentional. Not something you'd ever have to worry about again. Adrian tapped a finger against the desk. You stepped on me. Natalie felt her face heat up. That was circumstantial. You broke my phone. Also circumstantial. You forced me to listen to an unsolicited TED Talk about the unofficial elevator code. She bit her lip. In my defense, it was a highly educational discussion. Adrian stared at her, long and hard, like a man trying to determine whether he was dealing with a professional adult or a walking embodiment of chaos. Finally, he exhaled. You'll be working in the project analysis department under Melissa Grant. Natalie blinked. Wait, so I still have the internship? Yes. He folded his hands together. Unless you'd rather leave before you cause more structural damage to the building. Natalie lit up like a Christmas tree. Nope, I'm ready to work. To organize things, to avoid stepping on important CEOs. Adrian sighed. Let's hope so. Dismissed. She bolted out of his office before he could change his mind. A hurricane in the office. Natalie quickly learned that Drennan Industries was a place of strict order and precision. People walked swiftly, efficiently, like they had every second accounted for. Conversations were low, professional, to the point. Every office desk was immaculate, every spreadsheet meticulously arranged. And then there was her. By the time she reached her assigned desk, the whispers had already begun. That's her. The intern who almost took out the CEO? I heard she threw his phone out a window. She stepped on him, like a cockroach. Natalie groaned internally but forced a smile as Melissa Grant, the department manager, approached her. Welcome, Natalie, Melissa said, her expression professional but wary. We're a structured team here, organized, focused. Natalie nodded enthusiastically. Same. I'm all about structure and organization. At that exact moment, her bag slipped from her shoulder, knocking over a tower of reports on a nearby desk. The entire stack collapsed, papers flying like confetti. The room fell into stunned silence. Natalie swallowed. That was a test, and I just failed. Melissa massaged her temples. Come with me, the first catastrophe. Melissa handed Natalie a folder bursting with reports. Organize these. Enter the data into the system. 3-hour deadline. Natalie nodded determinedly. I've got this. She had nothing. Within 5 minutes, she realized the spreadsheets looked like ancient mystical runes. The charts were a maze of numbers, filled with percentages and projections she had no idea how to interpret. Panic set in. Okay, think. You can do this. And then she had a brilliant idea. She pulled out colorful sticky notes and began naming the charts to help her remember them. The depression spreadsheet, because the numbers kept dropping. The bankruptcy table, self-explanatory. The roller coaster of despair, featuring wild spikes and sharp declines. She was so proud of her system until Melissa returned. How's it going? Natalie jumped in surprise, knocking over her coffee cup. A full tidal wave of caffeine spilled across the reports. Melissa's eyes widened in horror. Natalie! Natalie frantically grabbed napkins, but it was too late. I can fix this, she promised. I just need more napkins. And maybe a time machine. Melissa pinched the bridge of her nose. Reprint everything and redo the notes. Natalie sighed in relief. So I still have a job? Melissa hesitated. For now, the CEO strikes again. Hours later, Natalie finally fixed the reports and headed to turn them in. She was so close to victory. And then at that exact moment, the CEO walked in. Adrian Drennan strode through the office like a king inspecting his empire. Everything went silent. Employees straightened their backs, typing with extra precision as if that would make them invisible. Natalie, on the other hand, panicked, which is why she dropped the entire stack of reports right at his feet. The room froze. Adrian looked down at the papers, then at her. Natalie gave him an awkward smile. Oh, hi again. A beat of silence. You have a personal vendetta against paperwork, don't you? He said, voice impossibly dry. She frantically picked up the papers. No, I love paperwork. It's so rectangular. He stared at her. Rectangular. Yes, and printed. Very nice. The entire office was watching in horror. Adrian bent down, picked up a report, flipped through it, and then paused. His brow furrowed. Why is this chart labeled the sadness chart? Oh no, Natalie felt her soul leave her body. She stammered, I can explain. Adrian slowly closed the folder. This better be a really good explanation. The room was dead silent. Natalie's brain short-circuited, so she just blurted out the first thing that came to mind. If I were a chart, that's what I'd be called too. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose. A long, suffering sigh escaped him. Change the names. Now. Natalie nodded so fast she looked like a bobblehead. The second he left, the entire office erupted into whispers. You survived. I thought he was going to fire you on the spot. Natalie slumped into her chair. At least he hadn't thrown a stapler at her. She'd call that a win, But she had a feeling this wasn't the last time Adrian Drennan would test her sanity. And if she was being honest with herself, she didn't hate it. Natalie Carter had never been the kind of person who fit seamlessly into corporate life. The strict rules, the rigid expectations, the suffocating silence of an office where employees spoke in hushed tones and walked like ghosts, none of it felt natural to her. She wasn't meant to sit in a stiff chair for hours, staring at spreadsheets filled with soulless numbers, acting like the entire office wasn't on pins and needles every time Adrian Drennan walked through the halls. But she needed this job. More than that, she needed to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was capable of thriving in a world that seemed determined to reject her. And yet, just 3 days in, she had somehow already destroyed company documents, embarrassed herself in front of the entire office, been the subject of relentless office gossip. If she weren't so desperate to hold on to this internship, she might have laughed at how utterly cursed her life had become. She sighed as she slumped into her chair, rubbing her temples. Melissa, the project manager, was running out of patience. If she messed up again, it wouldn't just be her reputation at stake. It would be her entire future. Determined to do something right, she buried herself in work, determined to make sense of the chaos in front of her. But the problem was the spreadsheets she had to sort through might as well have been ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. There were columns upon columns of figures, trend projections, and financial breakdowns that looked more like math horror stories than actual business reports. Natalie wasn't a complete idiot. She understood the basics of data analysis, but the sheer amount of numbers blurred together in an overwhelming mess. She needed to find a way to make sense of it all. And then she had an idea, a brilliant, genius, foolproof idea. She would give the reports names, not just boring official names, but ones that actually reflected the state of the numbers. And so the once lifeless spreadsheets were reborn. The sadness chart, because every number was in freefall. The optimistic delusion table, wildly inflated growth predictions. The bankruptcy graph, a tragic horror story in financial form. The roller coaster of despair, complete with unpredictable ups and downs. For the first time since she started, Natalie actually felt productive. Her method worked. It made the numbers make sense. It wasn't conventional, sure, but who cared as long as she got the job done? Unfortunately, her moment of victory was short-lived because she had forgotten one important detail. These reports weren't for her. They were for Adrian Drennan, and she learned this the hard way when she walked into a morning meeting only to see him holding one of her files, his expression unreadable. Her stomach plummeted. "Natalie," he said slowly, flipping through the document, "would you care to explain why this financial report has been renamed the sadness chart?" The entire office went silent. Melissa's eyes widened in horror. Natalie's soul left her body. She swallowed hard. Uh, Creative categorization? Adrian let out a slow breath, pressing his fingers to his temple, as if praying for patience. "Natalie," he said, and for the first time, there was something new in his voice, something that was almost amused but also deeply exhausted. "I don't have time for whatever this is," he continued. "Fix the names." "Right, yes, of course. And please," he added, looking at her with that quiet intensity that made her insides twist, "try not to turn financial reports into a tragic soap opera." Natalie let out a nervous laugh. "Can't promise anything." His gaze lingered for a moment before he shook his head and left the room. The second the door closed behind him, the office exploded into hushed whispers. "You're lucky he didn't fire you." I think he was holding back laughter. Did she seriously name a document the bankruptcy graph? Natalie slumped into her chair, mortified beyond words. But the strangest part, Adrian hadn't seemed angry. Annoyed? Sure. Exasperated? Absolutely. But there had been something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. The night that changed everything, after the disaster of the morning meeting, Natalie was determined to redeem herself. She stayed late, trying to clean up the reports, triple-checking every number, making sure there wasn't a single trace of personality left in the data. She had been so focused that she didn't even realize how late it had gotten. The office was nearly empty now, save for a few scattered employees finishing up their work. Natalie sighed, stretching her arms. "Okay, time for a break." She pulled out her headphones, scrolled through her playlist, and hit play. A familiar beat filled her ears, the kind of beat that demanded movement. At first, she just tapped her fingers on the desk. Then her shoulders got involved, and before she knew it, she was dancing in the middle of the office, spinning in her chair, clapping to the rhythm, completely lost in the moment. She felt free. No stress, no pressure, no terrifying CEO to a quiet cough behind her. Natalie froze mid-spin. Slowly she turned. Adrian Drennan stood in the doorway, watching her. Her soul ascended to another plane of existence. She was still holding her stapler like a microphone. Adrian's expression was unreadable. His arms crossed, his head tilted slightly, as if he was trying to process what he had just witnessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. That was unexpected. Natalie dropped the stapler immediately. Her brain short-circuited. I can explain. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Please, go ahead. She swallowed. Dancing improves productivity? Silence. His lips twitched. Is that a scientifically proven fact? Absolutely. Respected research studies, experts in productive dancing. For a horrifying moment, she thought she saw his mouth curve ever so slightly, but he quickly turned away. Just finish your report, Carter, he said over his shoulder. But before he left, he paused at the door. Oh, and Natalie? She braced herself. Yes? That spin in the chair was impressive. And then, just like that, he was gone. Natalie stood frozen, replaying his words over and over. Adrian Drennan had just complimented her dance moves. She wasn't sure what was more shocking, the fact that he hadn't fired her on the spot, or the fact that she could have sworn for just a second that he had almost smiled. She collapsed into her chair, heart racing. Something had changed. She just didn't know what. And for some reason, she couldn't wait to find out. Natalie Carter had survived her first week at Drennan Industries. Barely. She had already spilled coffee on reports, embarrassed herself in front of the CEO, and had somehow managed to become the center of office gossip, all within a few days. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for what happened next. Melissa appeared at her desk late in the afternoon, her expression unreadable. You're free tonight, right? Natalie, still recovering from her most recent disaster involving a printer jam and an unfortunate wardrobe malfunction, blinked. Why? Melissa folded her arms. Mr. Drennan has a dinner meeting with an important investor. He needs someone from the project analysis department to attend. Natalie blinked again, and then her soul left her body. Me? She croaked. Melissa nodded. You. Natalie let out a strangled laugh. Melissa, I don't know if you have noticed, but I'm not exactly CEO dinner meeting material. Melissa sighed. I know, but you're the only one available. Available? Natalie had never felt so unqualified for anything in her entire life. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg for literally anyone else to take her place, but Melissa's expression made it clear. There was no escaping this. Natalie groaned and dropped her head onto her desk. Okay, fine. But if I somehow burn down the restaurant, just know that this is on you. Disaster incoming. The restaurant was the kind of place that screamed wealth. Crystal chandeliers, a grand piano playing softly in the background, wine glasses that looked like they cost more than her rent. Natalie, in a borrowed dress that was a little too tight, felt painfully out of place. Adrian was already seated at a private table in the corner, looking as effortlessly composed as ever. His black suit was immaculate, his posture perfect, his eyes scanning the menu with the intensity of a man negotiating a billion-dollar deal. Natalie, meanwhile, was trying not to trip over her own feet. She sat down, feeling the weight of his gaze as he looked up. Before you say anything, she blurted, I just want to make it clear that I am here under duress. Adrian arched an eyebrow, duly noted. She picked up the menu and immediately choked on air when she saw the prices. Oh my God, there's a dish here that costs more than my refrigerator. Adrian didn't even blink. Order it if you want. I'd rather keep my fridge, thanks. He shook his head slightly, lips twitching as if he were suppressing a smile. The investor was running late, leaving them alone in awkward silence. Natalie fidgeted. The tension between them was thick, but not necessarily uncomfortable. It was something else. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. Tell me, have you come up with any more absurd nicknames for my company reports? Natalie rolled her eyes. I'm controlling myself, but I do have one saved in my drafts called the roller coaster of despair. For a split second, his lips quirked into the smallest hint of a smile. And suddenly, Natalie felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as terrifying as she thought, the catastrophe no one saw coming. When the food arrived, Natalie dove in immediately. But Adrian? He took one bite of his dish, then paused. A slight tension settled in his shoulders. His expression didn't change, but his fingers subtly twitched against the table. Natalie frowned. Are you okay? He nodded, but his jaw had tightened. His eyes were starting to water. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, and not in a good way. And that's when it hit her. Oh my God, are you allergic to something? Adrian hesitated, then cleared his throat. It's under control. It was not under control. Natalie frantically looked at his plate. What did you order? A waiter passing by overheard and froze. Oh, sir, your dish contains shrimp. Natalie's heart stopped. Adrian, are you allergic to shrimp? His silence said everything. Natalie shot up from her chair. Oh my God, are you trying to die? Adrian exhaled slowly, his hand pressing against his chest. The waiter looked pale. Sir, we can bring you an antihistamine. No need. Natalie interrupted, ripping open her purse. She pulled out a blister pack of allergy medication and shoved it at him. Adrian stared at it, then at her. You carry allergy pills? He asked, voice slightly strained. Natalie huffed. I like to be prepared, or, accident-prone. He didn't argue, just took the pill and swallowed it dry. The redness on his face slowly started to fade. The investor, of course, walked in at that exact moment, completely unaware that he had just missed the CEO of Drennan Industries almost dying over his own dinner order. Natalie sat back down, still shaken. Adrian, meanwhile, was eerily calm. He took a sip of water, glanced at her, and said, completely deadpan, well, that was unexpected. Natalie stared at him in disbelief. Unexpected? Adrian, you almost died. Over shrimp. His mouth twitched. You seem more upset than I am. She threw her hands in the air. Yes, because I'd rather not go viral for being the intern who let her CEO die during a business dinner. A long pause, and then, to her complete shock, Adrian Drennan laughed. Not just a small chuckle, but an actual, genuine laugh. Natalie froze. Adrian Drennan laughed. The world must be ending. She couldn't help it. She smiled. Adrian shook his head, still recovering from his own amusement. I'll be more careful next time. Natalie sighed dramatically. I'm adding rescue reckless CEOs to my resume. Adrian smirked. Noted, something had changed. By the time the dinner ended, Natalie felt like she had lived through an entire movie. And as they stepped outside, the air between them felt different. Not quite tension, not quite comfort, something in between. Natalie pulled Adrian's jacket over her shoulders, shivering slightly. He noticed. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his own jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She blinked. You don't have to do that. He raised an eyebrow. You're shivering. Natalie looked up at him, suddenly aware of just how close they were standing. Her heart raced. She swallowed, gripping the fabric of his jacket. Thank you. Adrian studied her for a moment, and then softly, too softly, he murmured, Good night, Natalie. She hesitated before replying, Good night, Adrian. As she turned to leave, she knew one thing for sure. Something between them had changed, and there was no going back now. If you made it to the end, comment shrimp, so I know you're still with me. Did you think Adrian would survive the dinner? Let me know your thoughts. Like this if you're loving Natalie's chaotic journey. Would you like me to continue this in the next chapter? If there was one thing Natalie Carter had learned during her short but chaotic tenure at Drennan Industries, it was this. Nothing stays a secret in an office. Not a coffee spill on important reports. Not a CEO getting stuck in an elevator with an intern. And definitely not a dinner date, even if it was supposed to be strictly business. By the time Natalie walked into the office the next morning, she knew something was off. The way people paused mid-conversation when she entered the room. The way whispers turned into muffled giggles as she passed by. The way Melissa shot her a knowing smirk from across the department. Oh no, oh no, no, no. Natalie slid into her chair and opened her laptop, praying that she was imagining things. That wasn't until Lisa, the overly enthusiastic office receptionist, leaned over her cubicle wall with the widest grin imaginable. So, how was dinner? Natalie froze. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, her brain screaming, "Error 404, excuse not found." I, what dinner? Lisa rolled her eyes, barely holding back her excitement. Don't play dumb. The entire office knows that Adrian took you out last night. Natalie choked on absolutely nothing. It wasn't a date, Lisa winked. That's not what it looked like. Natalie's soul left her body. Oh my God. How did they find out? She had barely even processed the events of the previous night herself, the near-death shrimp incident, the laughter, the way Adrian had placed his jacket over her shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. But apparently her coworkers had already written a full-blown romance novel about it. Nothing happened, she hissed under her breath. It was just a business meeting. Lisa shrugged, unconvinced. Sure, but I don't see him taking anyone else out to business dinners. Natalie's face burned. This was bad. This was really, really bad. The gossip war begins. The rumors spread like wildfire. Natalie could feel eyes on her all day long. Do you think something's going on between them? He's never taken an intern to a meeting before. Did you see the way he looked at her? There's no way that's just business. Natalie wanted to scream. It wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. Because deep down, she knew there was something between her and Adrian. Something unspoken. Something that made her heart race every time he was near. But that didn't mean she could just accept the office rumors and let them take over her life. She had worked too hard to get here, and she wasn't about to let a few nosy coworkers turn her internship into a soap opera. Or so she thought. Enter Logan Pierce. Just when she thought the week couldn't get any worse, it did. Because that was the day Logan Pierce walked into her life. She first noticed him at the coffee station, a tall, confident man with a smirk that screamed trouble. So, you're the famous Natalie Carter. She frowned, stirring her coffee. I wouldn't say famous. Logan chuckled. Trust me, in this office, you're practically a legend. Natalie groaned. Great, just what I needed. She didn't know much about Logan, except that he was a powerhouse in the tech sector and that he and Adrian, well, they had history, and not the good kind. Logan leaned casually against the counter. Word is, Drennan's taken a special interest in you. Natalie stiffened. Word is wrong. Logan smirked. Relax, I'm not here to interrogate you. She narrowed her eyes. Then what do you want? He took a sip of his coffee, eyes gleaming with something mischievous. An opportunity. And I think you'd be interested. The offer that changed everything. Logan's opportunity turned out to be a job offer, not just any job offer, a full-time, high-paying position with benefits, bonuses, and 0 unpaid internships involved. You're smart, Natalie, Logan said, sliding the offer letter across the table. And more importantly, you're wasted here. Natalie's chest tightened. A real job. A chance to get out of this chaotic mess, away from the rumors, away from the constant tension with Adrian. It was exactly what she had been dreaming of. So why did it feel so wrong? You don't have to answer now, Logan continued, but think about it. Drennan isn't the only option. Natalie swallowed hard. I'll think about it. She barely had time to process before her phone buzzed. A message from Adrian. Come to my office, now. Her stomach flipped. The confrontation. Since she entered Adrian's office, she knew something was off. He wasn't calm and composed like usual. He was tense. He was angry. Logan Pierce called me this morning, he said, voice low. Natalie's heart pounded. Oh, Adrian's gaze was piercing. He offered you a job. She bit her lip. Yeah. Silence. The kind that made her stomach twist. Finally, Adrian exhaled. Are you taking it? The question hung between them like a live wire. This was it. The moment she had to choose. And for some reason, the thought of leaving made her chest ache. Natalie looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of what he was thinking. But all she saw was a man trying to mask something deeper. Something he wasn't ready to say out loud. And suddenly, she knew. She knew why she couldn't accept Logan's offer. She knew why she couldn't walk away from this company, from this office, from Adrian. Because, Whether she wanted to admit it or not, she didn't want to leave him. She took a deep breath. No, I'm not taking it. Something shifted in Adrian's eyes. Something like relief, and for the first time in weeks, the unspoken words between them felt closer to the surface than ever. A new chapter begins. As she walked out of his office, heart pounding, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just another internship anymore. This was something else. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. But she had a feeling. She wouldn't be able to ignore it for much longer. Natalie Carter had never been one for office gossip. Sure, she overheard whispers, caught the occasional knowing glance, but she never let the rumors get to her. Until today. Because today, she walked into the office, ready for a normal day, only to freeze mid-step at the words floating through the room like a slow-motion car crash she couldn't stop watching. Did you hear? Adrian Drennan is engaged. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. Her entire body tensed before her brain had the chance to tell her not to react. Engaged? To who? Natalie forced herself to keep walking, but the voices only got louder as she passed. It's an arranged marriage, apparently. Some business deal with an influential family. Explains why he never dates, right? Natalie felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She had no reason to be upset, no reason to feel this ache that curled around her chest, tightening with every word. She was just his intern, just someone who happened to spill coffee on his reports, name his spreadsheets, the sadness chart, and accidentally get stuck in an elevator with him. She was nothing to him, right? But as she sat at her desk, staring blankly at her screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had cracked, and she had no idea how to fix it. The spiral. For the rest of the day, Natalie avoided him. She skipped the morning meeting, pretended to be too busy for lunch, and refused to so much as glance toward the executive floor. Because she couldn't trust herself. She couldn't trust that her face wouldn't betray every emotion swirling inside her. And most of all, she couldn't trust that if she looked at him, she wouldn't see something she didn't want to see. Like the truth. That maybe, just maybe, she had been fooling herself this whole time. That the late nights, the lingering glances, the quiet moments that stretched too long to be innocent. They had meant something, but now they meant nothing. Because Adrian Drennan was engaged, and she had been too blind to see it coming. A reckless decision. She wasn't sure what possessed her to do it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe, deep down, she was hoping she was wrong. But that night, Natalie found herself standing outside an upscale restaurant, watching through the glass windows as Adrian Drennan sat at a table for two. Her chest tightened. The place was expensive, intimate. A restaurant meant for couples, not business meetings. Her hands curled into fists at her sides as she scanned the room, waiting, watching. And then she realized something. He was alone. Her stomach flipped. Where was she? His mysterious fiancée? Why was he sitting there checking his watch, looking perfectly calm, as if he weren't supposed to be meeting someone important? Natalie took a deep breath, debating whether she should just walk away. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her problem. She was just about to turn when, "Are you going to come inside, or are you just going to keep spying on me through the window?" Her heart stopped. Adrian's voice was smooth, amused, and entirely too close. She whirled around and found him standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with those sharp, unreadable blue-gray eyes. Her stomach dropped. "I wasn't spying," she blurted. "I was just in the neighborhood." His lips twitched. "In the neighborhood?" "Yes." "And you just so happened to stop outside this exact restaurant?" "Yes." Silence. Then to her absolute horror, Adrian smirked. "Well then," he said smoothly, "since you're here, why don't you join me? The truth comes out." She should have said no, should have walked away, but she didn't. Instead, she followed him inside, letting him pull out a chair across from his own. Natalie sat stiffly, folding her hands in her lap, her mind racing for an excuse, for a reason why she was here. Adrian took a sip of his drink, watching her too carefully before speaking. "You heard the rumors." It wasn't a question. She swallowed. Maybe." His eyes darkened with something unreadable. "And you believed them?" She hesitated. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Why did you follow me here, Natalie?" Her throat went dry. "I didn't follow you." Adrian exhaled a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. You did. She clenched her jaw, heart pounding. Fine, maybe I did, but only because I wanted to see if it was true. He studied her, silent. Then finally he sighed. There is no engagement. Natalie's breath hitched. But it was just a rumor. Her pulse hammered in her ears. So you just let the entire office think you were getting married? Adrian gave a slow shrug. I wanted to see how you'd react. Her entire body went still. Her mind blanked. He said it so simply, so calmly, like it wasn't the single most infuriating thing she had ever heard in her life. Natalie's hands tightened into fists. Are you kidding me? Adrian raised an eyebrow. I never confirmed or denied anything. Her head spun. So you let me think. She stopped herself. Adrian's expression softened. Let you think what? She swallowed. He waited. And then she realized this had been the point all along. He wanted to hear her say it. To admit that the thought of him with someone else had made her spiral. That it had made her feel something she wasn't ready to name. But she couldn't. Not here, not now. So instead, she pushed back her chair and stood up. Enjoy your dinner, Adrian. His eyes flickered with something intense. But he didn't stop her. And as she walked out of the restaurant, her heart still racing, her chest still aching, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close. Natalie Carter never liked corporate events. She had been to a few in the past, boring networking mixers, painfully stiff business dinners where everyone spoke in that fake, overly polite tone. But nothing quite like this. This was on an entirely different level. The Drennan Industries annual gala was the kind of event where billionaires shook hands, investors made deals over champagne, and women in stunning gowns glided across the ballroom like they belonged in a different world. And Natalie? Natalie felt like an imposter. As she stepped out of the car in front of the breathtaking venue, a historic estate covered in golden lights, she fought the urge to turn around and sprint in the opposite direction. She shouldn't be here. She didn't belong here. Yet somehow, Adrian Drennan had asked her to be his date, the invitation she never expected. It had happened 2 days ago in his office. She had walked in expecting another overwhelming stack of reports. But instead, Adrian had been waiting for her, leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I need a date for the gala. Natalie had nearly choked on air. Excuse me? Adrian had studied her, his fingers tapping against his desk in that infuriatingly calm way of his. I need someone from the project analysis department to attend. You're available. Her stomach had flipped. Why me? She had blurted before she could stop herself. Adrian had tilted his head slightly. Because I don't want to bring anyone else. Her heart had stuttered in her chest, but she forced herself to play it cool. Wow, such a romantic invitation. I feel so special. He had smirked. Don't get used to it. She hadn't known what to say to that, so she had just nodded, agreed. And now here she was, standing outside the most intimidating event of her life, feeling like a fraud, a tension-filled arrival. As she walked through the grand entrance, her eyes scanned the room. Lavish crystal chandeliers, golden candlelight flickering across silk-covered tables, the hum of expensive conversations filling the space. And then she saw him, Adrian, dressed in an impeccably tailored black tux, standing near the bar with a glass of whiskey in hand, watching her. Her breath hitched. She had seen him in suits before, powerful, serious, always controlled. But this was something else entirely. And the way he was looking at her, like he wasn't quite sure if she was real or some kind of dream. She swallowed hard, forcing her legs to move, to close the distance between them. When she finally reached him, he took in the sight of her dress, deep emerald silk that hugged her waist, subtle but elegant, nothing too extravagant. Yet somehow, under his gaze, she felt like the most extraordinary person in the room. You clean up too, Carter, he murmured, his voice lower than usual. Natalie's lips twitched. I could say the same about you. His mouth curved ever so slightly, but before either of them could say anything more, a voice cut through the moment. Drennan. Natalie turned toward the voice and her stomach dropped. Logan Pierce, the rivalry unraveled. Natalie immediately felt the tension shift. Logan strolled toward them with his signature smirk, holding a glass of wine, looking like he had been waiting for this exact moment. Didn't think I'd see you here, Logan said smoothly, glancing between Adrian and Natalie with obvious curiosity. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. I could say the same about you. Logan's eyes flickered back to Natalie. And you must be the infamous Natalie Carter. Her pulse kicked up a notch. You say that like I'm some kind of urban legend. Logan chuckled. Well, when an intern gets personally invited to accompany Adrian Drennan to a gala, people talk. Natalie's face burned. It's just business. Logan's smirk deepened. Sure it is. She felt Adrian shift closer to her, his presence suddenly more imposing, protective. The tension between the two men was palpable, and then Logan said something that made her entire body go cold. Tell me, Drennan, do you ever let people close or do you just keep them around until they outlive their usefulness? Adrian's grip tightened around his whiskey glass. Natalie's breath hitched, because she wasn't stupid. That question wasn't about business. That question was about her. A silent confession. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze locked onto Logan's. For a moment, it felt like the entire room faded away, like there was only them, standing in the eye of a storm neither of them were willing to name. Then finally Adrian spoke. The difference between you and me, Pierce, is that I don't use people to get what I want. Logan raised an eyebrow. Don't you? Adrian's jaw clenched. And for the first time, Natalie realized something. This wasn't just rivalry. This was history. This was something deeper, something unresolved. And somehow, she was right in the middle of it. Logan finally took a step back, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. Interesting. His eyes flickered back to Natalie. Well, Carter, if you ever get tired of playing sidekick, you know where to find me. She didn't have time to respond before Logan turned and disappeared into the crowd. Silence. She slowly turned back to Adrian, heart still racing. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. For the first time since she had met him, she couldn't tell what he was thinking, and that terrified her. Adrian. But before she could say another word, he set his drink down and walked away. Her stomach plummeted because something had just happened, something big, and she had no idea what to do about it. A night that changed everything. For the rest of the evening, Adrian kept his distance. And Natalie? She felt like she was suffocating. She had never been so aware of him before, where he was in the room, who he was talking to, the way his shoulders tensed every time Logan glanced in their direction. By the time the night ended, she felt exhausted. And when Adrian's car pulled up to her apartment, she hesitated before getting out. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with something unspoken. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. You don't belong in the middle of this. Natalie's chest tightened. Then tell me what this is. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It doesn't matter. She swallowed. It matters to me. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw it. The thing she had been too afraid to see before. It was there, buried deep, masked by control and restraint. But it was there. A truth he wasn't ready to say, and a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Finally, she whispered, "Good night, Adrian." A long pause. Then softly, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "Good night, Natalie." She shut the door and walked inside, but she knew deep down nothing would ever be the same again. Natalie Carter had spent the last few weeks pretending nothing had changed, pretending that her heart hadn't clenched when Adrian Drennan walked away from her at the gala, pretending that she didn't notice the way he had been avoiding her ever since, keeping their conversations short, businesslike, distant, pretending that the ache in her chest every time she looked at him wasn't real. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about that night. The way Logan's words had struck a nerve, sending an emotion across Adrian's face she couldn't quite name. The way Adrian had watched her, as if there was something he wanted to say, but didn't. The way he had pulled away, just when she needed him to come closer. It hurt, more than she was willing to admit. And then, just when she had finally convinced herself that whatever had been growing between them was over, she got the message. "Meet me on the rooftop. 10 minutes. No explanation, no details. Just that." Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the words on her screen. She shouldn't go. She should ignore it. She should focus on work, pretend she hadn't seen it, or pretend she didn't care. But deep down, she knew. She was going to him, because she always did. The rooftop confession. Night air was crisp, the city lights stretching out for miles beyond the edge of the rooftop. Natalie stepped forward cautiously, her breath hitching when she spotted Adrian standing there, his hands in his pockets, staring out over the skyline. He didn't turn when she approached, didn't speak. For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence between them heavier than words. Finally, she swallowed hard. "You wanted to see me?" Adrian exhaled, tilting his head slightly before finally turning to face her. His eyes were different tonight, softer, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. And it scared her, because she knew whatever was about to happen, there was no going back. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly. Natalie felt her stomach tighten. "For what?" He let out a soft breath, shaking his head slightly. "For everything." Her pulse skipped. "Adrian, I need you to listen." The way he said it, weighty, low, urgent, like he wasn't sure he'd be able to get the words out if she interrupted, made her fall silent. And then he's closer. "The night of the gala, I walked away from you." Natalie swallowed a fighting the lump forming in her throat. "Yeah, I remember." He let out a humorless laugh. "Of course you do." Another pause. Then, "I didn't walk away because I didn't care." Her breath caught. His jaw tightened, as if he were forcing the words out, like every syllable cost him something. "I walked away because I care too much." Natalie felt like the world had just tilted on its axis. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He wasn't avoiding her because she didn't matter. He was avoiding her because she did. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And then, before she could even process what was happening, Adrian slowly got down on one knee. The proposal that changed everything. Natalie's entire body locked up, her brain completely short-circuited. What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice barely there. Adrian pulled a small black box from his pocket and flipped it open. Inside was a ring, not just any ring, a simple, elegant diamond set in gold. Timeless. Like him. Like them. Her head spun. "Adrian, marry me." Her breath hitched, her heart stopped. The city blurred around them, the wind cool against her skin, but all she could feel was him. "I know it's crazy," he continued, voice steady but filled with something she had never heard before. Something raw, something real. "But I've spent my entire life in control, in order, in structure, and then you walked in," his lips quirked slightly, "and you turned my world upside down." She let out a shaky breath, her eyes stinging. "I didn't mean to." Adrian shook his head, smiling softly. "I know, but that's the best part." Her throat tightened because she wasn't sure she could handle this. He took a deep breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Natalie, I don't want predictable. I don't want safe. I want you. With your chaotic reports and your coffee spills and your bad elevator jokes." She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh, blinking back tears. His voice dropped, softer than she had ever heard it. "I want a life that doesn't make sense." Her chest ached, because he meant it, every single word, and she knew. She knew that if she said yes, it wouldn't just be a marriage, it would be a leap, a risk, a promise that no matter how messy, how chaotic, how unpredictable, they would figure it out, together. She sucked in a shaky breath. Then, without thinking, without doubting, without holding back, she nodded. "Yes." Adrian exhaled, almost like he had been holding his breath this entire time. Then he slipped the ring onto her finger, stood up, and pulled her into his arms. A love that was anything but ordinary. Their first kiss as an engaged couple wasn't soft or hesitant. It was desperate, breathless, like years of unspoken words, unanswered questions, hidden emotions, all crashing together in a single earth-shattering moment. The second his lips met hers, the world disappeared. It was just them. Messy, chaotic, perfect. And then, a burst of cheers erupted behind them. Natalie startled, pulling back, breathless. She turned to find half the office standing near the entrance to the rooftop, watching them with wide eyes. Melissa, Lisa, even Logan standing with his arms crossed, a smirk on his lips. "Took you long enough," Melissa called out. Natalie groaned, hiding her face in Adrian's chest. Oh my God, you guys were spying on us? Lisa grinned. We had a bet going. Adrian just chuckled, wrapping his arms around her, holding her close. And for the first time in her life, Natalie wasn't afraid of the future. Because with him, it didn't have to make sense. It just had to be them. Natalie Carter had never imagined herself as the kind of woman who dreamt about weddings. She wasn't the little girl who pictured herself in a white dress, walking down an aisle surrounded by roses. She didn't spend her teenage years curating Pinterest boards with flower arrangements and first dance songs. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a mirror in a white dress that wasn't too extravagant, but felt just right, her heart pounding in a way she never thought possible. She was getting married. To Adrian Drennan, to the man who had once been a terrifying, untouchable CEO she could barely stand. The man she had stepped on, spilled coffee on, and irritated beyond human comprehension. The man who had somehow become the love of her life. And as she stared at her own reflection, gripping the edge of the vanity with trembling hands, one thought kept circling through her mind. How did we get here, a wedding that almost didn't happen? If anyone had expected a flawless, perfectly orchestrated wedding, they clearly hadn't met Natalie. Because of course, nothing had gone as planned. First, there was the dress disaster. Her tailor had accidentally sent the wrong gown, something straight out of a royal wedding, covered in layers of tulle and way too much lace. Natalie had taken one look at it and nearly passed out. This dress is bigger than my entire apartment, she had muttered, horrified, while Lisa and Melissa tried to convince her it wasn't that bad. Spoiler, it was. Then came the cake catastrophe. The baker had misread the order, and instead of the elegant, simple cake she had asked for, they had delivered a 5-tiered monstrosity covered in gold flakes and tiny sugar sculptures of business people shaking hands, because apparently someone had thought it was a corporate event. Natalie had stared at it for a solid 5 minutes before turning to Adrian, deadpan. Tell me this isn't a sign from the universe. Adrian had just shaken his head, smirking. We're eating it anyway. But none of that compared to the moment she almost didn't make it to the wedding at all. Because in true Natalie fashion, she had overslept. On her own wedding day, Melissa had burst into her apartment, horrified, while Lisa yelled, "We have a code red! I repeat, code red!" Natalie had sprinted around her room, throwing things into a bag, still half asleep, hair an absolute mess, tripping over her own veil in the process. By the time she arrived at the venue, breathless and on the verge of collapse, Adrian had been standing at the altar, looking entirely too amused. She had glared at him, panting. Don't say a word. His lips had twitched. I wouldn't dare. And now here she was, standing behind the wooden doors, her fingers tightening around the bouquet, her stomach flipping with nerves. The music started, and suddenly, everything else faded away. The moment she knew, as the doors opened and she stepped forward, Natalie's breath caught, because there he was, Adrian, waiting for her, looking at her like she was the only thing in the entire world. And in that moment, every fear, every doubt, every ridiculous thought about whether she was meant for this, whether she deserved this, vanished. Because this wasn't just a wedding. This was them, messy, chaotic, unpredictable, perfect. She reached the altar, heart racing, barely able to breathe. And when Adrian took her hand, his fingers warm and steady against hers, she knew. This was home. The vows that no one expected. Of course, it wouldn't be their wedding without a few unexpected twists. Like when the priest asked Adrian to say his vows, and instead of the serious, poetic speech everyone had expected, he took a deep breath and said, Natalie Carter, from the moment you stepped into my elevator and nearly killed me, I knew my life would never be the same. The crowd burst into laughter. Natalie groaned, covering her face. Oh my God, Adrian smirked, continuing. You have tested my patience in ways I didn't even think were possible. More laughter. Lisa actually wiped away a tear. But somehow, despite all of it, I fell for you. I fell for the way you talk when you're nervous. The way you turn financial reports into soap operas. The way you always manage to surprise me, even when I think I've got you all figured out. Natalie swallowed hard, because suddenly it wasn't funny anymore. Suddenly, it was everything. Adrian's voice softened. You make my life unpredictable, and I wouldn't change a second of it. So in front of everyone here, I promise you this. I will always be the one who makes sure you set your alarm, who keeps extra coffee stocked in our kitchen, and who stands by you no matter what disaster you bring into our lives next. Natalie let out a choked laugh, blinking rapidly. And then it was her turn. She took a shaky breath, squeezing his hands. Adrian Drennan, I never planned on falling in love with you. In fact, I think I planned on doing the opposite. More laughter. Even Adrian's lips twitched. But somehow, between all the chaos, I realized that life without you is just too quiet, too predictable, too normal. She bit her lip, her voice growing thicker with emotion. And I've never wanted normal. I've only ever wanted you. Drian's fingers tightened around hers. Her voice broke slightly as she whispered, so I promise to love you, even when you forget to answer your emails, even when you sigh dramatically at my spreadsheets, even when you pretend not to laugh at my bad jokes. I promise to always keep life interesting. I promise to be yours. Silence. And then, before the priest could even finish his next sentence, Adrian pulled her into a kiss. The guests erupted into cheers. Lisa shouted, finally. Melissa dabbed at her eyes. And Natalie? She melted into him, laughing against his lips. A love that was never supposed to make sense, but did anyway. The rest of the night was a blur. Dancing, champagne, a toast that turned into a roast session, courtesy of Lisa. At one point, Natalie and Adrian tried to sneak away for a quiet moment of alone, only to be caught by a crowd of employees demanding they kiss again for a photo. And as she stood there, hand in Adrian's, watching the people around them, she realized something. She had never been the kind of woman who dreamt about weddings. But this was better. Because this wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect. It was them. And that was enough. As the night wound down, Adrian pulled her close, his lips brushing against her ear. So, was it worth it? Natalie smiled, resting her forehead against his. Every second. And in that moment, she knew. This was just the beginning. A year had passed since Natalie Carter had walked down the aisle, promising to love Adrian Drennan, her impossible, exasperating, wonderful husband, for the rest of their lives. And if she had thought marriage would somehow make life with Adrian less chaotic, she had been very, very wrong. Marriage had been its own adventure. From learning how to share a closet without a war breaking out, to discovering that Adrian had an unholy addiction to perfectly organizing the fridge, to adapting to the way he read every email with the intensity of a courtroom drama. Every single day with him had been filled with unexpected moments, exasperated sighs, laughter, and love. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for this moment. Because as she stood in the middle of their apartment, staring at the tiny pregnancy test in her trembling hands, she realized something. Her life was about to change. Forever, the surprise that changed everything. Natalie's heart pounded as she stared at the result. Positive, her breath hitched. She blinked, hoping maybe she had read it wrong. Nope, still positive. Oh, oh. She sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing a hand to her stomach, her mind spinning. She wasn't just Natalie Carter anymore. She was about to become someone's mom. A million emotions rushed through her at once: excitement, terror, shock, overwhelming bone-deep joy. She had never pictured this moment, but now that it was here, she couldn't imagine anything else. But before she could fully process it, she realized something even more terrifying. She had to tell Adrian. Operation Surprise, you're gonna be a dad. Natalie wasn't exactly known for her graceful approach to big announcements, but she couldn't just blurt it out. No, this moment needed to be special. So she grabbed a piece of paper, wrote down the words, "Congratulations, you've been promoted to daddy," and carefully slid it into an envelope. Then she placed it on his desk, right on top of the one thing he couldn't ignore, his daily reports. And then she waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Then, finally, Adrian walked into the room. She watched, heart hammering, as he picked up the envelope, brows furrowing in that intensely focused way he always did when reading something important. Then, he froze. His breath hitched. His eyes flicked back to the words. And then he looked at her. Adrian's reaction, which was frankly unexpected. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared. Natalie's stomach twisted. Was he in shock? Was he happy? Was he about to have an existential crisis? And then he let out a breathless laugh, a real one, the kind of laugh she had only heard a handful of times. "You're serious?" he asked, voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. She nodded, his expression changed. Something deep, something raw and breathtaking flickered across his face. And before she could say another word, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. His lips pressed against her hair, his hands trembling against her back. "We're having a baby." It wasn't a question, it was a realization. "A promise, Mom." Natalie let out a choked laugh. "Yeah, we are." And then, for the first time in their entire relationship, Adrian Drennan, the man who was always in control, always calm, genuinely lost his mind. Pure, unfiltered joy and maybe a little panic. Adrian had never been someone who showed his emotions easily. But that night he didn't even try to hold them back. He kissed her, long and deep and filled with every unspoken emotion he had ever felt for her. He picked her up and spun her around the room, laughing, completely ignoring her shrieks of protest. "Adrian, put me down. This is dangerous. I can't believe this. You're acting like a lunatic. I'm going to be a dem." She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop grinning, because no matter how many disasters they had stumbled into together, this was the best one yet. And then, of course, the reality of parenthood hit him. "Oh my God." He paused mid-step, completely serious all of a sudden. "I have to learn how to install a car seat." Natalie burst into laughter. "That's what you're panicking about? And baby-proofing the house? And pediatricians? And wait, do we need a birth plan?" She cupped his face, still laughing. "Adrian, breathe." He took a shaky breath, pressing his forehead to hers. "How are you so calm?" She grinned. "Because I know we're going to be a mess, but we'll figure it out." And she meant it, because chaos had always been their love language, and somehow it had always led them exactly where they needed to be. If there was one thing Natalie had learned from her journey, from stepping into Drennan Industries as a nervous intern to standing here, pregnant with the child of the man she never expected to love, it was this: life never goes as planned. You can have the perfect roadmap, the 5-year plan, the detailed spreadsheet of how your future should look, but life will throw unexpected people, unexpected love, and unexpected joy your way. And when it does, you have to let it happen. Because sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. Sometimes the greatest love stories start with a complete disaster. And sometimes the most terrifying, beautiful adventure of all is the one you never saw coming. Comment congratulations to celebrate the beginning of their next adventure. Do you think Adrian will survive fatherhood? Drop your parenting advice below. Like this if you've loved every second of their journey. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible love stories that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in the magic of the unexpected. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning.